Political uncertainty in Israel as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fails to form a coalition government. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. He is Israel's longest-serving prime minister, but after 15 years, 4 elections in the past few years, and an ongoing corruption trial, Benjamin Netanyahu's hold on Israel may be coming to an end. Stephanie Fried has more in this report.
This is the fourth time in 2 years that interim Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has tried to form a coalition. Previous attempts were either short-lived or failed. As in prior rounds, Netanyahu's Likud party didn't secure the 61-seat parliamentary majority needed to form a government, so in trying to build a coalition, Netanyahu is dependent on support from parties with divergent political ideologies. One example, the openly racist ultra-right Religious Zionist Party, which supports Netanyahu but won't join forces with the Arab-Israeli Ram Party, also amenable to collaboration with Netanyahu. In a last-ditch bid for support, Netanyahu offered the premiership to ultra-right Yamina Party leader Naftali Bennett. Bennett reportedly declined the offer. Israel's President Reuven Rivlin can grant Netanyahu a 2-week extension. Although he did that before in 2019, Rivlin is not expected to do that this time. Alternatively, he can task opposition leader Yair Lapid with forming a government, a more likely scenario. Lapid, who leads the centrist Yesh Atid party, also offered the prime ministership to Bennett in exchange for loyalty. Both parties are part of a, quote, anti-Bibi political bloc working to oust Benjamin Netanyahu from his premiership. The deadline comes days after 45 people were crushed to death in a stampede at a religious pilgrimage site. The state comptroller is calling for an investigation into reportedly avoidable events that led to the tragedy. Also on Tuesday, Netanyahu's corruption charges trial resumed in Jerusalem, with the prosecution's key witness taking the stand for cross-examination by Netanyahu's defense team. The likely outcome doesn't look promising for Netanyahu, but if he lives up to his nickname, the Magician, coined for his ability to escape seemingly impossible political quagmires, the Magician may yet pull a rabbit out of his hat. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
There's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Simcha Rothman was recently elected to Israel's parliament, known as the Knesset. He's a member of the Religious Zionism Party. Barak is an Israeli pollster and political analyst. Jafar Farah focuses on equality for Arab citizens in Israel as the head of the Mossawa Center. And Amotz Asa-El is an award-winning journalist and senior commentator with the Jerusalem Post. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Amotz Asa-El, let me start with you. We've had 4 elections, more than 2 years of political deadlock. Where does it go to from here?
I think that even among his own following, there is a growing impatience with his repeated failures to seize control of the situation. And lastly, historically speaking, with him having been prime minister in aggregate 15 years, spread over a quarter of a century, there's a growing feeling that his era is in its twilight.
And Amotz, as you say, the mandate will be passed on to someone else. It seems that is likely. Who are the leading contenders then? Could they have more success at forming a government?
Well, the leading contender is Yair Lapid, head of the centrist Yesh Atid, or There Is a Future faction. And alongside him, there is Naftali Bennett, whose faction is smaller, but because he represents the right and because this would be a very eclectic coalition in which the right wing would be the weak link, there is a budding agreement among its many components that they might actually prefer to give him the first opportunity and then have him rotate with Yair Lapid.
Barak, you are a pollster and you have your finger on the pulse of Israeli public opinion. How divided is the country right now? And in your view, who do you think is likely or could be successful in forming a new coalition?
Well, I have my finger on the pulse of the Israeli public. It looks like the Israeli Knesset has no pulse, and the Israeli leadership has no pulse, because for 2 years we've been going back and forth to elections, and the possibility, even likelihood, is that we're going to a fifth election. So the Israeli public, they don't have a very high expectation anymore from their elected officials, because they can't seem to get anything done. There is a deadlock. It's not clear at this point. I mean, Netanyahu is trying every single trick in the book that he can to stay in power. The problem with the other side, the coalition of change, as they like to call themselves, is they have no clear leader. They don't even have a consensus candidate, because Bennett is not really a consensus person. He's more of a blackmail candidate by saying, up until now, I could go either way. He himself has no direction as to what he wants or how he wants to govern as prime minister. There's no legislative agenda among this wide eclectic group, as Amotz said, and there's no vision. There's no vision for the country other than changing Netanyahu. So now that you've changed Netanyahu, what are you going to do? Who's going to lead? Who's going to get all these ministries? What's the direction? There's nothing there. So whereas Netanyahu is in his twilight, I will agree with that. The twilight could be close to the Northern Pole in the summer, which is daylight for really, really long. And it's not clear that they can finally put an end to it, because they're just not organized and they're not united.
Mitchell, as you pointed out a moment ago, you said, there's a likelihood of a fifth election. Will that solve anything?
Probably not. For the Israeli public, probably not. It will probably be that some of the smaller parties will have to band together and run together. We'll probably come up with the same numbers. But for Netanyahu, it's the perfect solution, because he remains prime minister, he remains in power, and nothing gets done. So he can still deal with his trial as a sitting prime minister. It will buy him another 5 months of possibly staying in power. And Netanyahu always likes to roll the dice, because instability and uncertainty is how he best governs.
Simcha Rothman, after 15 years, as we've just heard, Benjamin Netanyahu is Israel's longest-serving prime minister. Are these the twilight days for him?
I think that in the Israeli system, first it's the current time is in office since 2009, so it's 12 years now. But in the current system in Israel, we have a parliamentarian system. You don't vote for a person; you vote for a party. I am supporting, and my party supports Benjamin Netanyahu for prime minister, but is not part of our party. We have the obligations that we have. So basically, having term limits in a parliamentarian system is something that doesn't work so well with the system. Now, I think that you can argue that there might be too long or not too long, but one thing you can't argue with, the fact that the largest party and the largest supporter group of parties is for Benjamin Netanyahu. You have many Knesset members that are obligated to support him, and you have when you look at the other side of the political map, whatever name you want to call it, it's hard to recognize what they are agreeing on, besides that the fact that they don't want Netanyahu to be prime minister. That's not a way to build a coalition, and that's not a way to lead a country.
But Simcha, do you get the sense, as we've seen in Israel, as we heard from Israel, that there is something called Netanyahu fatigue right now, that it's time for him to go?
Again, I think with the current elections result, I think the demand for him to leave is not democratic. Of course, you can do it, and there are political measures you can do to unite an ad hoc coalition just to throw him out of office and then don't agree on anything else. I think it's not a legitimate use of the political power in Israel. I think to tell more than 1 million people who voted for Netanyahu party, the largest number by far, almost double than the second party in Israel, that their choice should be thrown out just because some people have Netanyahu's fatigue, as you said. I think it's not democratic. But of course, we are not supporting Netanyahu because we support the person. We support a right-wing government. If Netanyahu can bring it, we will support it. If Netanyahu will bring a coalition, today he is a prime minister. He has a coalition that it's not a right-wing government.
Yeah.
That's why we're not part of the coalition. That was the case in the last year. So we are not about a person. All the discussion about a person just missing the point in Israeli politics.
Amotz, does Simcha have a valid point there that, as a politician, Benjamin Netanyahu may have been in power for too long, time for him to go. But what is the alternative? What is the other side offering?
Well, first of all, I think his reading of the election results is a bit misleading because there was an emphatic anti-Netanyahu vote, and it is the majority, arithmetically speaking. And that's the most important thing, in my view, or the biggest change, at least, that this recent election produced. And in terms of an alternative configuration's durability, I think that we're underestimating it. They do have the beginnings of an agenda. First of all, they will focus on rehabilitating the economy. That's an issue about which everyone agrees and on which they don't have major differences in terms of how that should be done. Secondly, there still is the remainder of the pandemic situation to overcome, even though Israel has handled quite remarkably the challenges that it posed until now. There still will be a great deal of dealing with that. These two issues will dominate their agenda on a day-to-day basis. There is also agreement among these components that all the issues they disagree on, primarily the Palestinian front, will basically be governed by a status quo. And it's already impressive the way all these 7 parties right now, and as of a month by now, are avoiding any pronouncements that might be controversial. They're careful not to pull the carriage each in its own direction. Yeah. That might be the beginning of, if not a beautiful relationship, then at least a workable one.
Okay. Jafar Farah, let me bring you into the conversation right now. After the last election, there was a scramble to find coalition partners. Both sides looked at the 4 seats that were won by the United Arab List. That's a small Islamist party, which is led by Mansour Abbas. That would have been a first, but it didn't happen. What happens now?
Actually, for the first time, they are part of the talks between the coalition and the opposition. It's the first time since '92 that any political party, any Arab political party, is relevant for some kind of a coalition. Now, Israel is divided heavily on not only on political issues. I think there is a right-wing majority in the Knesset, but still Israel is divided on issues of identity, corruption, issues related to the two-state solution. But more than anything else, there is identity voting in Israel, very strong identity voting. The Russians are voting for the Russian parties. And of course, the Arab community lost a lot of power as a result of dividing the joint list. One good thing that can happen if we will have another election round, that the Arab community may be united at least, or cooperate together, both parties, the joint list and the United Arab List. Both of them lost actually 5 seats in the last election, from 15 seats to both of them 10 seats. I think if we will have the 5th round of election, we may come back to become the 3rd political power, and that will change the balance that exists today between Netanyahu and anti-Netanyahu camp. There is no right and left today in Israel. There is Netanyahu's camp and there is anti-Netanyahu's camp. And it's related to issues like corruption. It's the main issue today in Israel is corruption. And even one of the 2 Arab political parties is willing to be part of Netanyahu, is offering support to Netanyahu's government. But still, we have extreme right wing that hold Netanyahu very strongly, and they refuse any kind of compromise with any of the political parties, the Arab political parties. So in this sense, I think Netanyahu would love to have another election round because of his legal procedures and the court case that he have. He would love to go for another election round. The question will be if the right wing will still get the majority in the Knesset like it happened in the last few elections. So the real challenge will be if we will have anti-Netanyahu leader like Gantz. You have to remember Gantz in the last election had like almost 30 seats and he lost all of them. So in this sense, the question will be if the opposition of anti-Netanyahu camp will be able to get a leader that can get everybody in the anti-Netanyahu camp around and get the majority, the 61 seats. That's a very important scenario if, only if, the Arab community will be able to reunite itself and gain more power and get again the 5 seats that we lost.
Simcha Rothman, there was a report in the Israeli newspaper Yisrael Hayom that reported that you were part of a team that looked for discrepancies at polling stations in Arab voting precincts. Prime Minister Netanyahu, he met with you to discuss this and look at the legal options that were open to Likud. What became of that effort?
First, just to say something about the what's said before about the fact that there is no arguments about economy in the anti-Netanyahu bloc, I have to say, sorry, I have to say that it's a mockery of the political system in Israel. We have in this so-called anti-Netanyahu camp, we have a communist party and the most right-wing economically party in Israel. So to say that there are no differences between a communist party and a free market party, how to fix the economy, is just a mockery of the Israel political system.
Which is the Communist Party? I'm unaware of a Communist Party being part of this configuration. There is no Communist Party there.
Yeah, which one is that?
They're not part of the current configuration.
I am saying part of the Joint Arab List is a Communist Party, Hadash, and also the views, the political views.
But they're not part. But the Joint Arab List is not part of the prospective coalition. Simcha, you're misleading the audience. The Joint List is not part of this prospective coalition.
All right, just one at a time. Simcha, finish what you were saying, and I'll get around to it.
Okay, may I answer? First, the Joint Arab List is counted at least as not voting against this coalition. But another party, Meretz, has people who are political views about economy. Communists, just like
Simcha, very quickly, I want to get to the point I asked you initially about, and that is this effort to find discrepancies in Arab voting precincts. What's happened to that?
We're not focused in the Arab communities or in the Arab voting polls. It's and I actually, as a lawyer, before I became a politician, I was involved in finding discrepancies in all past elections and represented members of the Likud. So this is my expertise, finding discrepancies in elections outcome, and I was representing in a case for the past 2 years. It was a general inquiry.
Right. I'm going to get to Mitchell Barak. Mitchell Barak, what do you make of the issues that are at stake if there is another election?
Well, listen, I think we see a good example of what's going on with member of Knesset Rothman, who, is looking to delegitimize the other side, make it illegal. They're stealing the election, looking at voter fraud. He wants to have his cake and eat it too. He says that, you don't have term limits because it's a parliamentary system, but yet then he says, well, Netanyahu got the most votes. But so what? The law doesn't say anything about the most votes, and only 3 candidates in this election ran for the post of prime minister. All the other parties ran as parties. Only 3 parties had the name running for prime minister on the ballot. The law is very clear. Out of the 120 members of Knesset, there will be 1 prime minister who's voted by 61 people. It doesn't have to be the leader of the list. It doesn't have to be the largest party of the list. It has to be someone who is a member of Knesset. Even Simcha Rothman could be prime minister, even though he's number 4 on the religious Zionist list. It doesn't matter. And if those people get together and they decide that they're going to elect someone prime minister based on 61 majority out of 120, or even 58 that some people aren't going to vote, that's legitimate. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's legal.
Mitchell,
so stop being a crybaby. That's the system.
Okay, Mitchell, what about this?
No, please. I have to respond to this.
All right, very quickly, yeah.
First, I didn't say at any point it's not legal. I said it's not legitimate, yes, and I can consider it an illegitimate move.
Democratic. Yeah, you said it's not democratic, Simcha. It's not democratic.
Yes, and again, yes, and it's not democratic to have a government that is sole purpose is to kick someone out of office and cannot decide anything else together. I think it's not.
That's
not
democracy, Simcha. That's the system. That's the system.
I think it's not taking into account what
that's the system.
Okay, Mitchell. Mitchell Barak.
It's not the system.
That's the law. That's the law, Simcha.
We can't talk over each other. Mitchell Barak, I want to ask you very quickly. There's an attempt by Netanyahu's supporters in the Knesset to pass a very controversial bill allowing for the direct election of a prime minister. How would that process work? What would it do?
Well, you would think it'd be a going out of business sale. That's what it seems like. I mean, you know, it's so worse than, you know, it's not only not, they're changing the goalpost as the game is being played. So there was an election, okay, the fourth election in a row. Netanyahu didn't win it. He can't put a government together. There isn't a government at that point. The law is very clear. If there's no clear winner at the end of, you know, the mandate that the president either gives to someone else or throws it to the Knesset, then it goes to fifth elections. But Netanyahu says, why should I? Now he can't form a government. He had 28 days to do it. He can't do it with the support of the Arab parties, without, with them leaving the Knesset to vote. So he says, let's change the goalpost. Let's make direct elections of the prime minister. Now, in the past, when they've had those direct elections and they've changed the rule, they've changed it for the following election, not for the next election. You need to have the regular election with the rules and then one after it. It's just that is really seems to be changing the rules, stealing the vote, and let's change it. Why doesn't he just make a law that you have to have the last name Netanyahu to be elected prime minister? It would be so much easier because he'd be elected.
Okay. Jafar, I know you've been wanting to say something for a long time. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, listening to this discussion, I think it's about time to put again on the table the main issues. We have here country without vision. We are going nowhere actually for the last 20 years, and it's not a question only of the last 4 elections. There is like occupation for almost 50 years, and I think, you know, the corruption issues that is taking place here is something that terrible for most people in Israel. And it's about time. It's not only about Netanyahu. It's about who will lead actually the public in Israel for a better future, who will talk finally about the core issues that most Israelis, Palestinians and Jews are suffering from. The issues of peace and occupation, 2-state or 1-state, the issues of corruption and the economic situation. There is like a rift in this country, and there is a balance of that is taking us nowhere. And it's much more the question when we will have a leader of the opposition or leader of the left wing in Israel that will have clear vision. What is the future of this country that will be an alternative vision to the vision of the right-wing camp in Israel that is, yes, winning the election for the last 20 years?
I want to say that I beg to differ with my colleagues. I actually think that there is a direction for the alternative government, and that there is a hope, judging by the recent elections results, on 2 fronts. The first is Mansour Abbas, the phenomenon. This is a gospel as far as Israeli history is concerned, to have an Israeli Arab politician come forth and say, I'm going to now, as my priority, place the needs and the systemic problems of the Israeli Arab community. That's a novelty, and he, in turn for that agenda, which he made plain to the voters, he won 40% of the Arab electorate. That's a major accomplishment, and we see its immediate result, how the following morning he became an actor, a decisive actor, in fact, potentially at least, in Israeli politics. That's one thing. The second thing is that Israeli politics, which during the Netanyahu years became even more sectarian than it had always been, has now possibly begun tilting to a slightly post-sectarian era, whereby the representatives of Israel's varied minorities and ethnicities and ideologies try to build bridges between them. I wouldn't belittle this possibility. I think there are signs that there is at least a motivation to accomplish this.
Mitchell, Barak, least we forget, Benjamin Netanyahu is still on trial on charges of bribery, fraud, breach of trust, and his attorneys, in fact, have just begun cross-examination of a prosecution witness, a key prosecution witness. The Prime Minister denies any wrongdoing. Where is this trial going legally, and what are the political ramifications?
The political ramifications are that we have a prime minister that not only can't govern because he doesn't have a government and doesn't seem like he will have a government, he's actually on trial for crimes that he is accused of committing while in office. Crimes of fraud and breach of trust, bribery. The question is not whether he received favorable press. He's almost admitted to that, and that's what the testimony is these past few days. The question is whether that can be constituted as a bribe, because it hasn't been proven to be a bribe anywhere else in the world. But the fact is that he's gotten favorable press coverage. He's gotten to take off press coverage that is not favorable from specific websites and media, and he's also been able to trash his opponents. So it doesn't look good, meaning from that point of view, from the public point of view. But the country is split, meaning basically the people that support Netanyahu, either they don't care or it doesn't register. They still want him to be prime minister. They still think he's the best leader. They still think he is the face of Israel to the world, and they're happy to take him, warts and all, deficits and all, they'll keep him. The other people look at that, the fact that he looks dishonest, he looks corrupt, he's on trial for corruption, as well as what you said, Netanyahu fatigue. It's enough already. He's done a lot of good things. A lot of people will give him credit, certainly for the vaccine, that most of our country has been vaccinated, even though we had a series of lockdowns, more lockdowns than any country. So he did show leadership on getting that vaccine, and people are appreciative of that. But at the end of the day, he's just been in way too long for many people, even some of his supporters, and he got less votes this election than he did the last one. 250,000 less votes, and that seems to be the trend. They're going towards other parties, the people, and leaving Netanyahu. And the danger is if he runs again in the 5th election, that more support is going to erode because people are tired of it, and they see him as the problem of why there's no government. He's the problem. He's also the solution. There could be a right-wing government formed tomorrow if Netanyahu would step down. So that's where it stands from the people's point of view.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.